Number 10. Grand Canyon UFO Crash Site. In recent years, this image of what looks like a crashed spaceship has appeared online, along with stories about a team of experts discovering at a crash site in the Grand Canyon. The reports, which seem to come mostly from obscure pseudoscience websites rather than trusted news sources, claim that the UFO crashed 4,000 years ago, but was only recently discovered. According to one tale, the vehicle was made of an unknown metallic substance that emitted low levels of radiation. Its discoverers allegedly moved it to a secure, top-secret location. The stories about the UFO are frustratingly vague, with one Histeco.com article stating that the craft was of a decent size and that it could carry about 20 individuals of a certain height. It references a so-called expert named Dr. Henry Lomont. The interior supposedly contained old food, drinks, and machines that resembled oxygen tanks. But we were unable to find any credentials for an astronomer named Henry Lomont or any information from trusted sources about the crashed UFO. So, did it really exist? What do you think? Number 9. Peculiar prehistoric predator. Around 506 million years ago, during the Cambrian period, a strange sea creature whose body resembled a spaceship lived in the ocean in what is now Canada. Nicknamed the Mothership, Titanosaurus gainensis fossils were recently discovered in the Canadian Rockies, the last place one might expect to find an ocean. But back when the creature existed, global temperatures were much higher. Consequently, sea levels were also higher, and much of North America was covered in water. The name Titanosaurus, which means Titanic helmet, refers to the creature's hard shell, which made up about 2/3 of its body. At just 20 inches long, it wasn't very big by modern standards, but it was one of the world's largest predators at a time when most other animals were smaller than a person's thumbnail, according to paleontologist and lead study author Bernard Caron, who spoke with Reuters. Caron described the creature as a giant swimming head with a disproportionately small body. It had a circular mouth filled with triangular tooth-like structures, 2 claws, which it used for catching prey, and gills and flaps for swimming. The strange species likely fed on worms and other small prey that were buried in the sea floor. It's so bizarre looking that even the scientists who found it were perplexed and unsure of exactly what kind of animal it was. Number 8. A UFO over Canada. On July 30th of this year, 2 pilots, one flying a commercial aircraft and another flying a military plane, reported seeing a bright green UFO over the Gulf of St. Lawrence off Canada's east coast. Both witnesses claimed that they saw the flying object for just a few seconds before it disappeared into the clouds. Thankfully, the incident did not affect either flight's operations. Aviation and shipping researcher Stephen Watkins examined the data from the flights and noticed that the military aircraft climbed 1,000 feet at the time of the sighting, perhaps to avoid colliding with the strange object. Watkins conceded that what looked like a UFO may have been a meteor. The timing matches up with the early stage of the annual Perseid meteor shower. Unlike the US, the Canadian government does not keep records of alleged UFO sightings, but there's no shortage of these incidents, and some civilians have collected tens of thousands of pages of data. Earlier this year, the Pentagon released a report on 140 UFO sightings. It concluded that most of the time, people probably did see an actual object, but there's no evidence pointing towards the incidents having anything to do with aliens. Number 7. A "what is this" star. Earlier this year, scientists announced the discovery of a star so peculiar they hesitated to put a name on it, instead categorizing it as a "what is this" or WIT object. Located over 25,000 light-years from Earth, in the heart of the Milky Way, the star appeared to blink on and off right before the researchers' eyes. Experts have only witnessed this phenomenon twice, and they don't know what causes it. They know of 5 objects with properties indicating that they experienced the phenomenon. The most recently observed star, known simply as VVVWIT08, is about 100 times bigger than the Sun. It's periodically blocked by a small object with an opaque disk, and scientists don't know what that object is. A gigantic star called Epsilon Aurigae is another star that blinks. In this case, a dust cloud passes by every 27 years, causing the star to dim. Scientists solved the mystery of these dimming periods fairly recently, in 2018. They believe that there are many more space objects that exhibit similar displays, and their next step is to determine what the companion objects are that cause it to happen. What do you think causes these stars to blink? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. Unusual tree species. While working in Peru's Manu National Park in 1973, a botanist stumbled upon a bizarre tree that reaches up to 20 feet tall and grows tiny orange paper lantern-shaped fruit. Dr. Robin Foster, who discovered the tree, noticed that it had properties of plants from several different families. This was surprising, since she could usually categorize a plant just by looking at it. Samples from the specimen sat unidentified at the Field Museum in Chicago for nearly 50 years. Finally, in 2015, a team of botanists received enough funding to take a closer look at it. They attempted to do genetic testing on it, but the DNA was too broken down to get the results they needed. Researchers contacted Manu National Park scientist Patricia Alvarez Loaiza and described the tree to her. She tracked down a live specimen and took samples for DNA analysis. The results classified the tree as coming from the Picramniaceae family. But it looked so different from its relatives, the team second-guessed the results and sent the samples to Wade Thomas, an expert in the Picramniaceae family at New York Botanical Garden. He told Popular Science that at first, he too thought that the other researchers were mistaken, but he did some digging and concluded that they were right. Dubbed Enigmano alvarezii, it was named as a new species and genus. Thomas pointed out that in our current era of rapidly decreasing biodiversity, it's more important than ever for scientists to catalog new species. After all, knowing what a plant is and where it can be found are the first steps to conserving it. Number 5. Strange solar object. In 2005, scientists spotted an object whirring through space like an asteroid, yet it had the physical characteristics of a comet. While asteroids tend not to change in appearance, the object, dubbed 2005 QN173, sheds dust while it travels and has a long, thin tail. These traits indicate that it's covered in ice that vaporizes into space. It's located in the outer reaches of our solar system's asteroid belt, completing a full orbit roughly every 5 years. Thanks to their highly elliptical orbit, comets spend most of the time far enough away from the sun to remain frozen. They only come near the sun and Earth for short periods at a time, which is when their tails appear, courtesy of sublimation. This process turns solid ice directly into a gas, with no liquid phase in between. Objects in the asteroid belt, on the other hand, are typically inactive at all times. The discovery blurs the lines between asteroids and comets, two things that scientists previously thought of as two separate, distinct objects. 2005 QN173 is one of just 8 objects in the asteroid belt that researchers have observed in an active state multiple times, and it's one of 20 suspected main belt comets, as they've come to be called. It has an unusually narrow tail, which means that dust is flowing from it at extremely slow speeds and with a weak flow. But dust wouldn't normally be able to escape at such a slow pace, suggesting that another force is at play. Lead research author Henry Say explained that the object's nucleus could be spinning at a really high rate, causing the dust to flow more than it normally would. Scientists will get another chance to observe 2005 QN173 up close in February 2026, when it will be visible from the southern hemisphere and close enough to the sun to become active again. Number 4. Premature male babies age faster. It's a well-known fact that premature babies are at a higher risk of serious health problems than babies born at a normal weight. But scientists recently found that some preemies also age faster later in life. As part of a decades-long study on extremely low birth weight (ELBW) babies who were born at 2.2 pounds or less, a team of researchers determined that by the time they reach their 30s, ELBW males are genetically around 4.6 years older than men of the same age who had a healthy birth weight. The study focused on biological age, meaning the genes of ELBW males display similar chemical changes to the genes of someone older than them. For some reason, this doesn't happen with ELBW females. These findings corroborate the results of previous studies, which indicate that premature males are more sensitive than premature females to prenatal stress. and the reasons for this are entirely unclear. But the research undoubtedly shows that being born prematurely can play an important role in aging. Neuroscientist Ryan van Lieshout pointed out the results emphasize the need to closely monitor the health of ELBW males throughout their lives and to educate them on taking care of themselves to promote healthy aging. In the meantime, experts are trying to better understand why ELBW males age differently and what can be done about it. Number 3. Iapetus. Saturn has 82 moons, more than any other planet in our solar system. In 1671, Iapetus was the second moon to be discovered orbiting Saturn, courtesy of Italian astronomer Giovanni Cassini. That was a long time ago, but Iapetus has stuck in scientists' minds ever since because it has several properties that they can't quite explain. For one, it went missing for decades. Cassini observed Iapetus on the western side of Saturn. When he went to look for it on the eastern side of the planet later in its orbit, it was gone. Armed with a new telescope, Cassini finally spotted the moon again in 1705 on the eastern side of Saturn. It was much fainter than it had looked on the western side. Iapetus is the outermost and the third largest of Saturn's 8 most significant moons. 7 of these moons orbit within 1.6 degrees of the planet's orbiting plane. Iapetus, on the other hand, is tilted at 15.5 degrees compared to the rest of the Saturnian system. This makes no sense, because Iapetus is similar in composition to the planet's other prominent moons, and its orbit appears to be completely normal. What's even weirder is that Iapetus is shaped like a space object that completes a rotation every 16 hours, but it takes 79 days for the moon to rotate once. Iapetus also has a ridge on its equator that spans nearly its entire diameter. The ridge is segmented and appears to break into 3 parallel ridges at certain points, and nothing quite like it has been seen in any other space object. 350 years after Cassini made these observations, scientists are still trying to explain the weird features of Iapetus, and they've repeatedly come up empty-handed. Number 2. Perplexing Antarctic sponges. While drilling nearly 3,000 feet into the ice on Antarctica's Filcher-Ronne ice shelf earlier this year, a team of geologists spotted a collection of sponges and other life forms attached to the side of a rock. These stationary creatures were found living in pitch darkness and rigid sub-zero temperatures. Scientists were perplexed how anything could live in such a harsh environment where there's no sunlight and no obvious food sources. Thanks to advanced technology, experts are just now starting to explore beneath the ice shelves, which constitute some of the least studied habitats on Earth. British Antarctic Survey scientist Hugh Griffiths told CNN that the total area humans have seen below the ice shelves amounts to roughly the size of a tennis court. He further explained that the creatures found on the rock must be highly specialized for surviving in the environment they live in, because there's a good chance that they go without food for long periods of time. Some of them could be new species of creatures that already live in Antarctica. Learning from these hardy specimens could prove useful for helping scientists understand how they withstand their inhospitable habitat. In order to do so, scientists will have to gain better access to them and do more research on what goes on deep beneath the ice. As Griffiths put it, there is a whole world that we know nothing about. There is life on Earth that isn't playing by the rules that biologists understand. Number 1. Mysterious DNA. Deep in the mud of the California wetlands, scientists have found an unusually large DNA structure made up of massive strings of DNA. Known as a Borg, it likely belongs to a single-celled organism. It carries numerous genes that are unknown to science, and experts don't exactly know what they do. Geomicrobiologist Gillian Banfield and her colleagues were digging for DNA fragments that are involved in the carbon cycle when they unexpectedly found the Borg. In a recent study, the team wrote that they believe the structures are a type of extra chromosomal element, meaning they store extra DNA outside their chromosomes. ECEs often come with genetic advantages that give them capabilities beyond essential functions, such as antibiotic resistance. Borgs possess a fascinating combination of features, and roughly 80% of their DNA performs unknown functions, according to lead study author Bassem El-Shayeb. The remaining 20% of material consists of genes that help to boost their host's capabilities, like metabolizing methane. The Borg's ability to efficiently metabolize methane means they could potentially come in handy for removing greenhouse gases from the environment. They may also be able to improve protein production and boost the nitrogen fixation process, which turns nitrogen into compounds that help crops grow.
Number 10. Lost Kings of Teotihuacan. The pre-Columbian capital of Teotihuacan was once the largest city in the Americas. Located near modern-day Mexico City, this sprawling urban center existed 1,000 years before the Aztec Empire came to power and resettled its ruins. Curiously, no royal tombs have ever been found here, but experts believe that kings were buried at Teotihuacan. In 2003, archaeologists made some headway in their search for a royal burial when they discovered an ancient tunnel below a pyramid called the Temple of the Plumed Serpent. Altogether, they found around 50,000 artifacts, including objects made from wood and obsidian. The team came one step closer to finding a king's tomb in 2015, when they found large amounts of liquid mercury at the end of the 1,800-year-old tunnel. Lead archaeologist Sergio Gomez told NBC News that he's not sure why the mercury was put there, but that it may represent a river or lake of the underworld. Excavations are ongoing, and over 100,000 artifacts have been uncovered so far, including statues, shells, jewelry, and ceramics. At the end of the 330-foot-long tunnel, at the midpoint beneath the pyramid, there are 3 chambers that have yet to be explored. In addition to thinking there may be a tomb within the complex, Gomez believes that the site was used for initiating new leaders. The tunnel was in use for at least 2 centuries and may have been created to represent the underworld. It's where priests went to carry out rituals and make offerings to their gods. Whether or not any royal burials will be found remains to be seen. Number 9. Shrieking Death Whistles. The sound of the Aztec shrieking death whistle is arguably one of the most terrifying noises a person can hear. Writing for Discovery, Ruben Westmoss described the whistle as sounding like a screeching zombie, if zombies screeched instead of moaned. But no one has actually ever met a zombie, so who knows what they sound like, right? Anyways, these macabre musical instruments may have had numerous uses, but archaeologists are unsure of what they were. But they do know that the shrieking death whistles were used during human sacrifices. Back in the 90s, researchers in Mexico found the 500-year-old decapitated remains of a sacrificial victim clinging to a death whistle. One of the scientists blew into it and discovered its high-pitched, death-like scream. Music archaeologist Arnd Adja Both told Gizmodo that the different airstreams generated within the structure are what give it its shrill sound. In addition to being used for human sacrifices, Aztec shrieking death whistles may have been used in healing rituals and/or for military purposes. Number 8. Skull Ring. While metal detecting in the Welsh community of Carreghofa, David Balfour encountered a gold ring decorated with a skull made from white enamel with the surrounding inscription Memento Mori, a Latin phrase that translates to "Remember that you die." South Wales Central Senior Coroner Graham David Hughes officially classified this spooky jewelry as treasure, a designation that makes them the property of the UK government. Based on its style, shape, and script, the ring was likely crafted between 1550 and 1650, during either the Tudor or early Stuart periods, according to Mark Redknapp of the National Museum Wales, who said in a statement that the rare piece symbolizes the high mortality of the time, as well as the vanity and brevity of life. It likely belonged to an elite member of society. The Memento Mori theme was common in artwork at certain points in history. While these types of artifacts tend to strike us as morbid, they were more or less intended as an optimistic reminder to make the most of one's fragile and short time on Earth, according to ArtNet. The ring was examined along with a trove of other recently discovered, less creepy Welsh artifacts, including 3 hoards of gold and silver coins, gold and silver jewelry, and personal accessories dating back between the 9th and 17th centuries. Number 7. Altamura Man. Sometime between 187,000 and 128,000 years ago, a male Neanderthal fell to the bottom of a 26-foot deep well and died from either hunger or dehydration. His remains were discovered in 1993 inside a karst cave in Puglia, Italy. Known as the Altamura Man for the town he was found near, the man's bones had become covered in calcite over the many thousands of years following his death. Because archaeologists believed that removing his remains from the well would kill him, they extracted a bone fragment for analysis and obtained a DNA sample. It is the oldest known Neanderthal DNA ever obtained by experts. In 2016, researchers constructed a highly realistic model of the Neanderthal's face and body. He was short with a large nose, a protruding jawline, and an elongated cranium. While the individual's body was characteristic of other Neanderthals that scientists have found, his head was shaped slightly differently. Paleontologist Giorgio Manzi described the Altamura Man as having archaic traits and representing a sort of morphological bridge between Neanderthals and a previous human species called Homo heidelbergensis. This makes sense since he lived during the earlier days of the Neanderthal's existence, which lasted from 200,000 to around 40,000 years ago. Number 6. Skull Tower of Niš. In 1809, Serbian rebels suffered a crushing defeat by the Turks amid a widespread rebellion against the Ottoman Empire called the Serbian Revolution. In what became known as the First Serbian Uprising, the vastly outnumbered Serbs realized that their options for fighting against the Turks were limited. With 36,000 enemy troops at their doorstep, it became clear that their only realistic choices were to surrender or flee. But Commander Stevan Šindelić refused to go down without a fight. In a last-ditch effort to eliminate as many Turks as possible, and as a final show of disrespect toward Turkish General Hurshi Pasha, Šindelić entered a fully stocked ammunition supply room and shot a gunpowder keg. The victors built a tower with the decapitated skulls of 952 Serbian soldiers. Known as the Cele Kula, or the Skull Tower of Niš, the macabre structure is located in modern-day Serbia. General Pasha commissioned it after the battle as a warning to anyone who might be tempted to cross him. He was outraged at Šindelic's behavior and ordered his men to mutilate the Serbian fighters' corpses. The 15-foot-tall, 13-foot-wide structure originally consisted of 56 rows with 17 skulls each. The Serbs finally drove out the Ottomans in 1878. In 1892, the Serbian government built a chapel around the tower. Many families retrieved the skulls of their fallen loved ones. Today, only 59 skulls remain at the site, attracting some 30,000 visitors every year. Number 5. Venetian Vampire. In 2006, archaeologists discovered the remains of a female vampire in a 16th century grave filled with plague victims on the Venetian island of Lazzaretto Nuovo. A brick had been jammed into the woman's jaw, forcing her mouth open. This was an exorcism technique that people practiced on suspected vampires at the time. The skeleton represented the first ever discovery of an alleged human vampire. A few years after being found, a study was conducted to try identifying the woman, why people thought she was a vampire, and what she looked like. The team determined that she was between 61 and 71 years old when she died. Most European women didn't live nearly that long at the time, so the woman's age was shocking. She lived mostly on vegetables and grains, indicating that she was probably from a lower class and likely lived a rather ordinary life. At the time, many people believed in vampires. This notion was partially fueled by a dark fluid that flowed from the nose and mouth of corpses during the decomposition process. When gravediggers reopened mass burials to add the bodies of recently deceased plague sufferers, they may have mistaken this fluid as the blood of vampire victims. Sometimes burial shrouds became soaked in the fluid and sank into the dead bodies' mouths, making it look as though they had chewed on the cloth, and soon enough, the plague was blamed on vampires. To stop the spread of the deadly disease, people wedged objects into the mouths of the dead. Other suspected vampires have been found since then, including one that was unearthed in Poland in 2014. Number 4. Prehistoric pregnant burial. A woman died while pregnant with twins around 40,000 years ago in what is now Hungary. She and her unborn babies were cremated and buried in a Bronze Age urn cemetery among hundreds of other graves. As part of an effort to better understand the little understood Vatya culture that the woman was part of, researchers recently examined the burial's contents. It contained noticeably lavish goods, including a golden hairpiece, a bronze neck ring, and 2 bone pins. Inside the urn were the bones of 2 fetuses who perished along with their mother about 30 weeks into her pregnancy. The woman died during her late 20s or early 30s. Based on her luxurious grave goods, she was probably a highly respected member of her community. It was also clear that every effort was taken to ensure that every fragment of the woman and her baby's remains were placed into the urn, unlike the cemetery's other burials, which are far less complete. A tooth and bone analysis revealed that she likely migrated to the regions as a child from the area encompassing the modern-day Czech Republic. Her elite burial suggests that she married a high-ranking member of the Vatya community, only for her life to be tragically cut short. The woman's cause of death is undetermined, but pregnancy or childbirth-related complications are a safe guess. Number 3. Books bound in human skin. A 2014 study found that a book called De Destinée de l'âme, or Destinies of the Soul, was bound in human skin. The researchers determined that the literary work was probably wrapped with the skin of an unidentified female mental patient who died from natural causes. Written by French novelist Arsène Houssaye, the book ended up in the hands of the author's friend, Dr. Ludovic Bolland, during the late 19th century. For reasons we can only guess, Dr. Bolland proceeded to bind it in human skin. This practice, known as anthropodermic bibliophagy, dates at least as far back as the 19th century and maybe even older. The Bristol Record Office in the UK owns another human skin-bound book, which is wrapped with the flesh of 18-year-old John Horwood, the first man to be hanged at Bristol jail. The disturbing work contains details of Horwood's gruesome murder of a woman named Eliza Balsam. Notorious murderer William Burke's skin was used for binding a small brown pocketbook following his execution in 1829. In a disturbing twist, the book's cover is stamped with his death date. There are no pages inside the appalling artifact, which would have been used for storing money and other personal effects. How and why the man's skin came to be used for the pocketbook's manufacture are a mystery to this day. Speaking with the BBC, Emma Black from the Royal College of Surgeons explained that some of Burke's skin went missing during a dissection of his remains. Soon enough, the pocketbook turned up for sale in Edinburgh, Scotland. In 1852, another murderer named George Cudmore's skin was used to cover a copy of the poetical works of John Milton after he was put to death for killing his wife. Public records confirm that Cudmore's body was dissected, but how and why samples of his skin were kept long enough to bind a book are unknown. Number 2. Mass burial of children. While working on a roadway in southeastern Poland in mid-2020, a work crew discovered human bones. Local archaeologists were summoned to the scene, where they found out what they described as a frightening 17th century mass grave containing the remains of at least 119 people, mostly children. The youths were laid to rest with coins in their mouths. This was part of a pre-Christian burial tradition called Obols of the Dead, or Charon's Obol. The coins were placed in the mouths of the dead as a payment to Charon, the mythical ferryman who carried the souls of the newly deceased across a river that separated the land of the living from the land of the dead. The practice lasted well into Christian times, according to archaeologist Katarzyna Oleszek, who spoke with the First News. Some of the coins found at the site date back to the reign of King Sigismund Vasa, who ruled Poland from 1587 to 1632. Other coins, known as Borytynsky, were minted between 1648 and 1668 during the reign of John II Casimir. There are no grave goods, indicating that the people buried at the site came from a poor community. Oleszek pointed out that the cemetery is undoubtedly Catholic in nature, based on the arrangement of the burials and the fact that they are well cared for. Between 70 and 80% of the individuals were children when they died. This may reflect the high child mortality rate at the time. The cemetery's presence confirms long-standing local rumors of a nearby children's graveyard. The team that exhumed the remains announced plans to study and respectfully rebury them. Number 1. Pregnant Mummy. In 2016, a team of archaeologists examined the remains of a deceased pregnant woman found inside a sarcophagus with inscriptions indicating that there was a man inside. They were looking for signs of ancient diseases and causes of Black Death when they realized that the mummy was entirely different from the person their coffin described. Donated to the Warsaw Museum in 1826, the mummy's false identity went unnoticed for nearly 2 centuries. A series of CT scans and X-rays finally alerted the team that they were not dealing with the remains of an ancient priest from Thebes named Hor Jehuti. Measurements of the fetus's head suggest that the 20 to 30-year-old woman was between 6.5 and 7 months pregnant when she died during the 1st century BC. It is the first known example of a mummified mother-to-be with preserved soft tissue, according to lead study author Wojciech Eastman. 4 bundles inside the mummy's abdominal cavity are thought to contain her lungs, liver, stomach, and heart. The organs were extracted, embalmed, and placed back in her body, according to ancient Egyptian burial customs. But the fetus remained in her womb, untouched, leading the team to believe that the culture saw unborn babies as part of their mother, rather than as individuals deserving of their own afterlives. It's unknown why the woman was inside a man's coffin, but these types of mismatches are relatively common and often result from looting and illegal excavations. Damage to the woman's neck indicates that grave robbers yanked valuable amulets off her. Nobody knows what killed her, but her pregnancy may have played a role, as it was common at the time for expectant mothers to die from complications.
Number 10. Leah Davis Loken. During a long-distance cycling trip earlier this year, 65-year-old Leah Davis Loken stopped to rest in the small town of Ovando, Montana. The avid cyclist was traversing the Great Divide mountain bike route with her sister and a friend when they pitched their tent, hoping to catch some much-needed rest and relaxation. During the early morning hours, some campers nearby heard the horrifying sounds of a bear attack. They used bear spray to scare the animal away and dialed 911. Emergency responders found Loken wounded and unfortunately failed to save her life, despite their best efforts. The bear had entered her tent and mauled her to death. Authorities began searching for the grizzly, who had also apparently entered a chicken coop and killed several chickens that night. They couldn't find the animal, but a few days after the attack, a resident shot and killed a 400-pound, 181-kilogram bear who was proving to be a nuisance around town. DNA tests later confirmed that it was the same bear that fatally attacked Loken. There was no prior history of problems with the 6-year-old male grizzly, but officials suspected that he entered Ovando in search of food. It was the first fatal grizzly bear attack in the area in 20 years, and the second in 50 years. Number 9. The Johnson family. In 2015, Hannah Johnson and her boyfriend Thomas Camp decided to take a family camping trip in Tennessee Colony, Texas, on some land they had recently bought. They were joined by Camp's 2 adult sons, Nathan and Austin, Johnson's parents, Carl and Cynthia, and her 6-year-old son, Cade. Little did they know, the previous landowner was lurking. Angry that the property had a new owner, he was waiting for the perfect moment to get his revenge. While 4 of the campers were out looking for firewood, 33-year-old William Hudson shot them all to death. He then tossed their bodies into a pond nearby on the property. Then Hudson went to the family's campsite where he shot Hannah. He then attacked her father, Carl, shooting and beating him to death. Hannah's mother, Cynthia, hid behind some chairs until dawn, and then sought help. She was the only survivor. Anderson County Sheriff Greg Taylor told a local TV station that it was the biggest massacre he had ever witnessed. During Hudson's trial, Cynthia recalled hearing her husband ask him why he was hurting them and saying that he thought they were friends. She said that she heard a fight going on inside the camper between Hudson and her husband. Hudson exited the camper, threw up, and walked toward her hiding spot, making her terrified that she was next. But he didn't notice her. Instead, he grabbed a beer out of a cooler just feet away from her, then sat down on the cooler and drank it. Then he went back inside the camper and finished beating Carl to death. Cynthia explained that Hudson had been unpleasant but helpful toward the family during a previous encounter when they got their truck and camper stuck in the mud. He had also volunteered to help his first 4 victims collect firewood the night he murdered them. When they were gone for over an hour, it was a little concerning to the group that had stayed behind, but when they heard gunfire, they assumed the men were just having fun. Little did they know, Hudson was headed their way next. A jury found Hudson guilty of 3 counts of capital murder. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Number 8. Alexander Lofgren and Emily Henkel. Alexander Lofgren and Emily Henkel were traveling through Death Valley together in April of this year when their Subaru got stranded in a very remote area. They tried reaching help on foot, but were no match for the harsh climate and the unforgiving terrain. When the couple failed to return from the trip, their loved ones alerted the authorities, who found the car with a note inside that said, 2 flat tires, headed to Mormon Point, have 3 days' worth of water. Rescue teams located Lofgren and Henkel later that day and made an aerial rescue attempt, but couldn't get to the pair. Emergency personnel finally reached the couple the next day. Sadly, by then, Lofgren had died from injuries he sustained on the arduous trek. Henkel suffered from a foot injury that required surgery, but was thankfully rescued. She later revealed to the press that Lofgren had lost his footing and fallen off a cliff to his death. It was the same cliff that Henkel hurt her ankle on, forcing her to survive, injured and alone, until rescue arrived. Number 7. Triple tragedy. Over the summer of 2021, 3 young men named Dawson Brown, William Mays Jr., and Cole Sover attended a country music festival in Michigan. The trio stayed in a portable camper where they were found dead. 2 other men who were staying nearby were taken to the hospital in critical condition. An investigation found that they had all been exposed to carbon monoxide from a generator that was operating too closely to their campsites. It had leaked the odorless gas right in their direction, most likely killing Brown, Mays, and Sover in their sleep. Their deaths were found to be a tragic accident resulting from the camping spaces being crammed too closely together. As the campground's owner, Bob Ron, pointed out to local station WNEM, even the most experienced campers can make simple mistakes that can end up costing them, or someone else, their lives. In cases like this, having a working carbon monoxide detector can be life-saving. And, as the situation proves, it's better to be safe than sorry, even when it comes to seemingly redundant precautions. Number 6. Crystal Turner and Killen Schultz. As the nation collectively held its breath hoping for missing vlogger Gabby Petito's safe return earlier this year, newlywed couple Crystal Turner and Killen Schultz were shot dead at their campsite in southeastern Utah. Police found their bodies in a creek riddled with gunshot wounds. The pair lived a bohemian lifestyle, traveling from campsite to campsite in their converted van, according to Schultz's aunt, Bridget Calvert, who spoke with NBC News following the double homicide. Co-workers and friends reported the couple missing when they failed to show up at work. Just days earlier, they had met with friends at a bar and mentioned a creepy man who was camping nearby and made them feel like they had to move their campsite. Calvert said it was unusual for Turner and Schultz to feel unsafe, considering how independent and accustomed to the great outdoors they were. In other words, they must have had a good reason for being on guard. They even made an offhanded comment that if they were murdered, the strange man was responsible for it. But in hindsight, nobody who knew the women thought they were serious about what they were saying. Authorities ruled out a possible connection to Gabby Petito's disappearance, but they've remained mostly quiet about the specifics of the case. It's been over 3 months since the murders, and investigators appear no closer to identifying or apprehending a suspect than they did at the very beginning. For now, all the public can do is wait and hope that whoever took the couple's lives is brought to justice before they harm anyone else. Number 5. The Phillips family. In mid-September, a New Zealand man named Thomas Phillips took his 3 kids on a weeks-long camping trip without telling loved ones about the plan. Relatives were alarmed by his swift departure with his 8-year-old, 6-year-old and 5-year-old, especially since the nearby waters were rough. They found his abandoned vehicle near the beach and assumed the worst. A search initially proved fruitless, and it seemed to confirm the family's fears. But they clung to hope the best they could. Police suspended the search after 12 days, promising that they'd resume searching if any signs emerged that Phillips and his kids might be alive. Just when nearly all hope was lost, the family re-emerged. And it wasn't just Phillips's relatives who were frustrated by his decision to disappear for weeks and put them through 17 days of hell without telling anyone. The authorities charged him with causing wasteful deployment of police personnel and resources, which is understandable since the search had come at an enormous cost to taxpayers. The moral of the story? Maybe it's a good idea to tell your family where you're going before you go. Number 4. Camping near death's doorstep. Something that seems like an obvious danger to one person may not even cross another person's mind. Take, for example, a family who decided to camp just feet from the edge of a 280-foot, 85 meters cliff in North Yorkshire, England, earlier this year. A member of the public contacted emergency services after seeing the family's tent pitched perilously close to the steep drop. They were also in an area that's known for landslides and were perched in a spot that was dangerously unstable and prone to both collapse and landslides. A Facebook post by the country's Maritime and Coast Guard Agency revealed that the group consisted of 2 adults and 1 child, sending many social media users into a rage about the danger the youngster was in. On the other hand, one hiker and witness named Barbara Knaggs took a more compassionate approach, reminding others that nobody knew what the family's circumstances were and pointing out that they may have fallen on hard times. The Coast Guard rescue members who attended to the family offered them some wise advice about safe places to camp, and they also used the close call as an opportunity to give the same advice to the general public. Have you been camping? Would you need someone to let you know to steer clear of ledges and other dangerous camping spots? Let me know down below. Like and subscribe. Jonathan Gerrish and Ellen Chung. Jonathan Gerrish and Ellen Chung were an adventurous couple who didn't shy away from an unforgiving environment. But when they failed to return from hiking in the Sierra National Forest near Yosemite National Park in August, their nanny grew concerned and reported them missing. The next day, search and rescue workers found the couple, their 1-year-old daughter, Muji, and their dog dead. Investigators were perplexed by the scene, which displayed no obvious causes of death. They combed the area for clues and came up with nothing. Answers finally came in late October when the Mariposa County Sheriff's Office announced that the family had died from hypothermia and dehydration. Hypothermia is when the body's temperature rises to dangerously high levels, and it's rare for someone to die from it in Mariposa County, according to Sheriff Jeremy Breeze, who said this was the first case of its kind he's seen in 20 years. There are still lots of questions remaining for the family's relatives and loved ones who don't quite understand how things reached such a disastrous point, but they were grateful for the information that the investigation did come up with, which they said they'd use to help them come to terms with the more confusing aspects of the tragedy. Number 2. Cleo Smith. A parent's worst nightmare came true in October for the mother and father of a 4-year-old, Cleo Smith, who disappeared from her tent during a camping trip in Western Australia. She vanished with her sleeping bag, sparking a frantic 18-day search and a government reward of $1 million for information leading to her recovery. The investigation led police to a run-down house in Carnarvon, where they broke in at 1 in the morning and found the little girl safe and sound. She identified herself as Chloe Smith and was soon reunited with her parents. Authorities have remained somewhat quiet about the circumstances surrounding the ordeal, but they did say that 36-year-old Terrence Darrell Kelly was taken into custody and charged in connection to Cleo's disappearance, and that the family doesn't know him. Kelly's cousin told Channel 9 that he had a bizarre upbringing and had recently grieved the loss of the woman who raised him after he was removed from his unfit mother's care. While this certainly doesn't excuse his actions, it could possibly offer some insight into why he abducted this innocent little girl. Woman survives months in the wilderness. A woman who went missing in November of 2020 was found in May of this year after surviving on her own in a canyon outside Salt Lake City, Utah, for 5 months. Rangers found her car abandoned around Thanksgiving of last year and failed to find her until the drone they were searching with crashed and forced them to enter the canyon on foot. When they went to retrieve the drone, they spotted her tent, which they initially assumed was abandoned. But then the woman stuck her head out to say hello. After months of surviving on grass, moss, and stream water, the woman was underweight and weak. Her co-workers told police that they suspected that she was battling mental health issues before she disappeared, leading them to believe that she actually chose to live in the canyon and perhaps wasn't necessarily lost. She was taken to a hospital for an evaluation. The Utah County Sheriff's Office commended the woman's survival skills and stressed the fact that she didn't do anything against the law, however concerning her situation might be. They also said that she might choose to return to the area and that they've offered her any resources she may need. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Bye for now.